Yes, Liz,
Okay.
I heard you,
I
Liz.
don't know why my camera's not working, and I don't know why. So
Okay,
You had that issue a couple weeks
we're
ago.
streaming.
yeah.
We are streaming now.
Okay.
You're screaming, Ken?
Yeah, I know. I'm screaming about a lot of things.
All right. So if we should get started. I don't know, Liz. Okay, I'm getting the thumbs up. So good evening, everyone. It is Tuesday, June 2nd, and we have our board policy meeting scheduled for tonight. But before we get started with the meeting, I just feel very strongly that we should take a moment to acknowledge the events of our country over the past week, starting with the horrific murder of George Floyd. As a board, I think I speak for all of us when I say we are acutely aware of the pain, anger, and distress that many of us feel. And I know that my fellow board chairs who are chairing curriculum and finance tonight will have some words to say as well. But before we get started, I just wanted to take a moment to pause and give us each a moment or two to reflect on the turmoil in our country right now. Thank you. I appreciate that. And we all are here to support our community in any way we can. So with that said, I'd like to welcome everybody officially to the Policy Committee meeting. And that includes my fellow committee members, Ms. Duffy and Mr. Jubileer and Mrs. Stern. And I'd also like to welcome our student representative, Avery Ciato. Our teacher representative is not able to join us today, from what I understand, but we are fortunate to have our great administrative liaison, Dr. Anthony Stevenson, with us. And I can see that he was here a moment ago. Our solicitor was around somewhere. I don't see his tile anymore, but
yes, I'm here.
Hello, Mr. Diazio. And of course, Mr. Thanks for being here. So we have at this moment the opportunity for some administrative remarks. Dr. Stevenson, do you have anything to share with us?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chairwoman Goldman. This afternoon we will have we will follow the agenda as outlined. My remarks for tonight is more catered for some clarification that I'll ask the solicitor to chime in a second. The co-chairs and I met with Ms. Smith, who helps us put all our information on board docs. And there were some questions around clarifications around references and citations. And I thought it would be appropriate to have a solicitor here, just go over. I shared with him some of those things. He can outline them then. For the sake of time, I hope that we can, if they're short questions, we can answer them tonight. If they're prolonged ones that we need to, that takes more time, we can memorialize and get back to folks. So the Diazio.
Yes, thank you. Does the committee want to ask any specific questions, or Dr. Stevenson did give me a flavor for what the board was thinking about, or certain members of the committee were thinking about earlier, but go ahead.
Yeah, well, Mr. Diaz, what I was thinking we might do is, there is something in terms of the citations to address, from my perspective, in each of the agenda items that we have tonight. So I was thinking that perhaps we could get started with the agenda, and we can bring up as part of that, at least I have in my notes, a question about the citations there. And we might be able to resolve some of this just by a simple discussion after one of the agenda items. If not, perhaps we can go into greater detail later. Okay. But would it be okay with you, unless you have some broad but brief framework to give us on citations, we can probably address this as we go through the agenda.
No, I think the only thing that might be helpful to keep in mind is that the hyperlinks to the policies generally get added after the policy would be adopted for a second read. And the reason there is because if there's going to be any changes to the documents, when you're moving footnotes around or trying to copy and paste language and move it around in board docs, the links get all messed up. And so the easiest thing to do is just to put the references in and then go back and hyperlink them at the very, very end. So that to the extent that there's links that are not hyperlinked, that's done intentionally. At this point in the stage. So I'll leave it at that for now, and then we can get started with the agenda, and I'll take any other questions as we go through.
Okay, I think that unless anybody has any objection, I propose we just get started and then we can address it as we go along. Okay, so with the next item on our agenda after that is public comment, and do we have any by any chance? Anybody? Mr. Petiti with us, or?
I'm here. There are no public comments.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And then, of course, the approval of minutes. Did anybody have a question about the minutes? No? Okay. So let's then, we've approved the minutes and move into agenda item number 4.1, policy 119. And this policy is up for a second read tonight. We're going to propose to the full board, if all goes well, that we do a second read of this at the June business meeting. So Dr. Stevenson, do you want to walk us through anything about this policy at this point?
What did you say? What number?
According to my agenda, we have policy 119.
Okay, I'm sorry. I apologize. I misheard. Yes, this policy 119, controversial student materials, was passed for first read, and we've asked that this be also moved for a second reading.
Okay, right. So from the business meeting in May, when we approved the first read, to tonight, there have not been any changes. So I would like to open it up to the committee to see if you have any comments about anything prior to our possibly moving it on for a second read at the end of this month. So let's see, who would like to go first? Mr. Jubilier, do you have anything?
I think it's good. I mean, what I was looking for, it's already in here, and it's in the AR, which is the hyperlink to policy 906, the formal complaints, which to me, when you read those together, it makes a whole. So I'm fine with it and have no question.
I just want to be clear though, Mr. Jubilier, administrative regulations, I don't believe are hyperlinked.
No, then maybe I could use that. I see the citation and I'm able to then go to policy 906.
Right. So policy,
the connection.
Yeah, just because I know this is your first year on the policy committee, just to be clear, that when you're connected to policy 906, that's not an administrative regulation.
No, I understand that.
To another policy.
No, I understand that.
Okay.
I apologize for the confusion, but I guess the bottom line is I see the connection and the ability to connect it, at least in the citation.
Okay.
Hang on, Amy, just for a second though, but it's not actually live yet, Jeff. It's not working.
No, understood. I see.
Thank you.
Where it would be live.
Right. Thank you.
Where it would be cited. Yeah. And I went on my own volition for now to look at 906 to understand that there was a relationship.
Yep.
Right.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Ms. Duffy, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. No comments or questions.
Okay. Avery?
I just want to say that I really feel that the new title is very appropriate to the policy, and I'm glad that we made that change.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Susan?
Yeah, my only comment actually has to do with the, maybe when this goes to the board meeting, the narrative can be updated because it reads kind of before we put the complaint procedure, it actually makes comment about taking the complaint procedure out, and we've put it back in. So just for the board meeting, if the narrative on this policy could be updated to reflect kind of what's actually the status on the policy, that would be great. But the policy itself is fine.
Okay, so Dr. Stevenson and Mr. Diazio, do you see where Susan's talking about where it says a complaint procedure is not appropriately placed in policy 119? So that language has been removed. I think what she's saying is that it's confusing because we actually did add in a cross-reference to a formal complaint policy. So to say we don't have that in there isn't exactly accurate. maybe the wording could just be tweaked to say, we have added in a cross-reference to a complaint procedure or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, whatever the correct wording for the narrative is.
I just want to make sure they get what you're saying. Is that, I see, I'm not sure if I'm reading any confusion there or not, but please let us know.
Yes.
I understand the comment. I think that in the prior version of the document, there was actually a step-by-step process as to what you would do to file a complaint.
Right.
And the narrative says we took that out and we
Right.
just are referring to another policy. But we can, if you think that needs clarification, Dr. Stevenson and I can definitely do that prior
Well,
to.
that's more of just, that's, for me, this is more just, it's an agenda housekeeping item.
Sure.
That when this goes on the agenda for the board meeting, Dr. Stevenson and, his people probably work on preparing the agenda and just update the narrative. That's all.
Okay.
That one sentence, that would be great. Okay, so that's noted, hopefully. And is there anything else, Mrs. Stern?
No.
Okay, I just want to draw your attention to the citation. And this, policy 906 formal complaints was listed as a legal reference in response to a question that was raised by us. So this is something that we recognize that you did on our behalf, because you are referring to 906. You added a footnote in the second to last paragraph where 906 would apply in the policy. We were wondering, we've learned a lot since speaking to Dr. Stevenson and Molly about what can be hyperlinked and what can't be. We now understand that a board policy in board docs doesn't come with a hyperlink.
Correct.
So Molly placed policy 906 formal complaints and designated it as a legal citation just to show. Yeah, can I finish the sentence for a second?
Yeah.
To let us know what it would look like to be hyperlinked. But we've also learned in that conversation that board policies are not really supposed to be designated as legal in the citation part of the policy. They're supposed to be designated as cross-references. So I think, we're striving for some consistency from here going forward in how we approach citations. So I wanted to put the question out there. Does it make sense now to put in policy 906, now that we know more about how the whole citation process works, to put policy 906 formal complaints as a cross-reference as opposed to with the word legal?
So can I just interject here? Because it was my understanding from our meeting Monday morning, cross-reference policies can be hyperlinked. They can't be footnoted within the text of the policy, but they can still be hyperlinked at the bottom. You were saying they couldn't be hyperlinked.
I'm sorry, let me clarify. They can't
be footnoted.
The footnote is not a hyperlink.
Right.
Or it's actually mentioned in the citation section, it can be hyperlinked. So I'm sorry. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to clarify. But policy 906 formal complaints, I think we should make the adjustment perhaps to put it as a cross-reference instead of legal. Would that be your recommendation?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, generally, when one policy references another, generally that's a cross-reference reference. Usually when in the legal section, you're citing statutes or regulations that require the school district to do something. So again, that's not the case in 100% of scenarios, but as a general matter, references to other policies generally make sense to me as cross-references. That's different than the PSBA recommended template citations. So if you take the PSBA templates, you will see that sometimes they cross-reference, but more times they just place them in legal. So there probably are many Radnor policies that have other policies in the legal section because, several years ago, the district did adopt the PSBA templates. But moving forward, we can certainly pay more attention to what goes in the cross-reference section versus in the legal section. From a substantive standpoint, there's no meaningful difference between the two. But in order to be consistent, we can certainly pay attention to that moving forward.
Okay, and I think as you'll see this going, as we go through even the policies tonight, to me, you know, and I'd be interested to know if there's anybody on the committee who feels otherwise, whatever is appropriate, whichever way is appropriate, and you recommend as our solicitor and Dr. Stevenson as our admin liaison recommends that we do with these citations in terms of format is fine. It would be my hope maybe that there could be some consistency to it as we do policy work.
Sure.
So would it be okay to land on something tonight that seems reasonable and employ it consistently going forward?
Okay, great.
Anybody on the committee have any feedback or thoughts, challenges to that, anything? No? Okay, so let's maybe, this recommendation, your recommendation is then to put it as, well, let's park it maybe as whether it's cross-reference or legal and go through the next few policies and see what's on there and land on something. Mr. Diazio, I'm going to give you a chance to process as we go through and come back to us. How about with a final recommendation once we go through these agenda items? Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay, super. So I guess since we've collected all the feedback on 119, it looks like that's ready to go for a second reading and adoption at the end of June. So moving on to the next agenda item, 4.2, Policy 108, Adoption of Textbooks. Once again, this is up for a second reading. Dr. Stevenson, did you want to add anything to the description of this item?
This policy as well had no changes. Therefore, we're asking that it moves on for a second reading as is.
Okay, terrific. Let's go around and see if anybody has any thoughts. Let me start with Avery. Do you have any questions, Avery, about 108 since we last saw it?
Questions.
Okay. Mr. Jubileer?
No questions.
Okay, Ms. Duffy?
No questions.
Okay, and Mrs. Stern?
Yeah, actually, looking at the red line and because of this conversation about cross-referencing, I actually think the line that we struck about authority should actually remain in the policy, because there's actually significant school code around the authority and the responsibility of the board to adopt textbooks, and we've deleted authority. So I would have said purpose. I don't know if definitions come before authority or if authority comes before definitions, but I actually think the line about authority belongs back in there.
Well, that would be, I imagine, a substantive change.
Yeah, no, I apologize for that. I don't know that I thought about it until we had this whole conversation about cross-referencing. But the fact of the matter is that all of the legal justification for this policy are reside with the authority, and it's all been struck. So I actually think it belongs back in there.
Okay, I mean, whether we have to do a substantive change or not isn't an issue, but I do want to give Mr. Diazio or Dr. Stevenson a chance to respond to the removal of it.
Right. Yeah, no, that's great. I'm just telling you what I think.
So in the redlined version of policy 108, essentially the current purpose and what was previously the authority say the same thing. In the prior version of this policy, there was no, quote, purpose, and the policy began with the authority. So,
oh, okay. So do you think that you'll cross-reference, do you think you'll footnote purpose with 1, 2, and 3, and that's where you'll bring in the school codes that basically, speak to the, oh, that actually makes sense, the way you wrote the purpose. If you put the legal footnotes there,
correct.
That's giving us the authority to have the purpose and then the delegation.
Correct.
Amy, I don't have an issue with it.
There's a number of policies that previously did not have a purpose in it because the purpose was really embedded in the authority. But previously, the committee has given direction that they'd like to see a stated purpose in each policy. So that's why that got moved around. But I agree with you, Mrs. Stern, that if we just simply place those footnotes there, and the references are down below. You can see them in the legal section, sections 508, 801, and 803 of the school code. We just need to make sure that we put the footnotes in the body of the policy itself.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and Susan, did you have anything else about it? Okay.
Nope.
That was going to be my feedback, that we are missing footnotes, not only for the legal citations, but also for the board policies in there. I wanted to ask if, again, for consistency, you would be adding footnotes.
Correct. And I'll check when we go back through that to make sure that we put them appropriately in either the legal section or the cross-reference section. And just to be clear, when I said earlier that there's no difference between, or substantive difference between a legal reference and a cross-reference, what I meant by that was not that they're one and the same. There is if you are looking for a dictionary definition, there is a difference between a legal citation and a cross-reference. What I meant was that if they're used interchangeably, whether intentionally or not, it doesn't impact your ability to enforce your policy, and it doesn't really change the meaning of your policy. But I didn't mean to communicate that those two terms are one and the same, because they are different. So we'll just focus our efforts in the future on trying to be consistent and putting the references where they belong.
Okay, that would be great. And there is another legal citation in this one that actually isn't numbered. So I just wanted to make sure that that's not put there by inaccurately, that it actually does serve a purpose to the policy. It just happens not to be numbered. That would be 24 PS 807.1. We've reviewed policies over the past year where we had some floating cross-references and legal citations that actually didn't need to be there. And since this one wasn't numbered, I just wanted to point that out as well.
Okay, we'll take a look at that. Okay,
so let's say that for, it sounds like the committee is good to move this forward for a second read, but we'll see a cleaned up citation section at the bottom in time for that. Okay, great. Then let's move on to item 4.3, policy 208, withdrawal from school. That is also up for a second reading in June. Dr. Stevenson, did you want to make any comments about this policy?
Again, this policy is coming back before the board, the committee, asking that it move forward. It was no recommended changes, and we look forward to moving forward unless the committee has other thoughts.
Okay, great. So Avery, have you any second thoughts before the second read about policy 208?
I do have one, and it might be more of a clarification question. You guys can answer this. In the red line, we had crossed out where it specified that the ages were 8 to 17. And in the new clean version, we simply just say compulsory school age. And I was thinking, especially since there has been a change in what that age range is, I was curious to know why we left out the numbers in the new form.
A good question. Let's turn that over to our administrative liaison or solicitor.
Sure. I think the thought here was that if the compulsory school age changes in the future, we would not have to necessarily bring the policy back for revision, and that we would instead communicate what the ages were by putting a link to the state regulation that explains what the compulsory school age is. And so that if the age changes, the policy actually would still remain applicable. Is that, I'm not sure if I explained that very well.
Yeah, that's clear. I was just thinking because not everyone might necessarily understand when a change has happened, but since you specified that there'd be a link that would direct people to the proper information for that, it kind of balances it out. Thank you.
Okay, great. Good question, Avery.
Yeah, absolutely.
You read those policies so thoroughly. You are a good student of policy, of everything, but I'm sure of policy. Mr. Jubileer?
Yeah, I have to follow that act. I was interested in the answer, and I liked Ed's answer because I was sort of thinking when Avery was asking your question, yeah, good question, as you did, Mr. Goldman. So No, I'm fine. I appreciate the explanation.
Okay, terrific. Ms. Duffy? Mrs. Duffy, you there? Maybe we'll come back to Mrs. Duffy. Ms. Stern?
I'm good with it. It's fine.
Oh, here she comes.
Am I
Okay.
back? Can you
Yep,
hear me?
you're- Yep.
Sorry. No questions.
Okay. Terrific. Again, I just took a glance at every item on the agenda. Note the citation section, and that looks like potentially what we're striving towards. This one sort of has it, I hate to say right, because there's not necessarily one right answer, but we might be striving to something like this citation section. Is that right, Mr. Diazio?
Yes, that looks correct. Yep.
Okay, super. All right, well then it looks like that one's ready to be on its way to our second read as well. So far we have those 3 policies up for second reading in June, and that moves us to agenda item 4.4, policy 613, cooperative purchasing. This is up for its first read towards repeal. Dr. Stevenson, you want to walk us through this?
Yes, policy 613, cooperative purchasing. This one is up for repeal because cooperative purchasing is appropriately discussed in board 610 procurement, and therefore the language is not necessary. Therefore, the administration is asking that this be approved for first read under repeal.
Okay, great. So this should, I think, move quickly. Avery.
No questions.
Okay, Mr. Jubileer,
No questions.
Mrs. Duffy,
No questions.
Ms. Stern.
No, I'm good. Thanks.
Okay, so that one's ready to be put forth for first read towards repeal in June. And that leaves us with our last agenda item for the evening, which is policy 006.1. This is a new policy, proposed policy, remote attendance and participation at board meetings. Dr. Stevenson or Mr. Diazio, you want to?
I will defer to Mr. Diazzo since he has can explain it in detail.
Sure. So this is a new policy that's being proposed. Certainly in the current times, government agencies are having meetings, board meetings, committee meetings, executive sessions by remote attendance. And so this policy puts in place the rules and the legal requirements around those meetings. In some ways, some school districts previously had policies on remote attendance and participation at board meetings, but found that they were too restrictive to actually work in the COVID-19 times. And most school districts that previously had a policy on remote attendance actually had to take board action to suspend it back in March because it wasn't working. It didn't allow the entire board in the case of an emergency to meet through electronic means. And there were just other restrictive provisions in there. So actually by not having a policy on this topic, Radnor didn't have to take any action to suspend any policy on remote attendance because there were no rules to suspend in the first place. And so in the absence of a policy, you just have to make sure that you comply with the law and you'll be fine as long as you act accordingly. But it does make sense now that we're, a couple months, into this, remote virtual setting to begin to think about what a policy may look like and should look like. So this is the first attempt at doing that. I will note that we started by looking at the PSBA template that came out. PSBA recently put out some recommended language. I will say this document that you're looking at is a fairly heavily edited version of that document, just because the language didn't fit exactly for what Dr. Stevenson and I thought that might work for Radnor. So what you're seeing is we started from the PSBA version, but it's heavily modified and heavily edited, which is actually the purpose of the PSBA policies to begin with. They're never meant to just be adopted without going through some level of customization.
Okay, Tarif, thanks for that background. I'd like to turn it over to Avery. Do you have any questions about this policy, Avery? No? Okay, Mr. Jubilier?
Yeah, I'm interested in our dialogue on this. It's such an important topic and an important policy. If I read it correctly, it doesn't seem like, Mr. Diazio, that we have to elucidate or identify this besides what's given as examples as other possible reasons that one would request being remote. Is that, in other words, maybe I give you an example, a religious holiday. Would that fall under something, you know, I would, for example, if I were requesting, I would be absent for a religious holiday, for whatever reason, probably not scheduled on a religious holiday, but just using this as an example, I would reach out to our president of the board and say, for X reason, I request to be remote, if I would participate or be absent. I'm just using that as an example to just think about other things that may not be specifically outlined in this particular policy.
Yes, the law does not limit the reasons why a member can participate remotely or the number of times that they can participate remotely. The board can certainly impose those own restrictions on itself, but there's no law that says these are the only reasons why somebody can participate remotely. So by saying that factors such as, that doesn't limit the policy application to those specific things listed. It just means that those are examples, the more common examples.
Sure. And if it was, I guess, just think more philosophically, if we were fine without it, what's, I mean, I see why, I guess I think there's a reason for it, but I'm wondering one may say, why do we need it then if we were fine during this pandemic situation without a policy?
The policy helps, you know, in terms of whether the policy is absolutely required, it's not absolutely required to have. However, what's important is that if you're going to have remote meetings from time to time, what's very important is to do it consistently, to ensure that the public participation procedures are the same in each meeting, and to make sure that the public participation procedures comply with applicable law. So the thought was, instead of just remaining silent and then every time you have to have a meeting remotely, to have to go through that analysis of, well, what do we have to make sure that we have lined up from a technology standpoint? What do we have to do to make sure the public can participate? The thought was try to lay out, you know, a framework in a policy so that it gives administration a starting point as to what to do. And it gives the public an expectation as to, you know, what a remote meeting might look like, the reasons why the board might go in the direction of having a remote meeting, and how they may go about participating. Or if nothing else, just reaffirming the fact that they can participate even though the meeting is being held remotely.
Thank you. I agree. And I may have further questions, but for now, that's it.
Great.
Just to add something to that explanation, if Ed didn't tell me if I'm correct in this, but this policy also gives us the opportunity to have select members who need to participate remotely, even when the board isn't meeting, when the board's meeting in person, to have a legitimate way to participate. I think that is, in my experience on the board and from watching meetings even before I was on the board, that was always a little dicey, because you didn't really have anything that was codified that said, yes, if one person was out of town and wanted to participate, they could call in. I think it was accommodated, but it wasn't really spelled out in policy as being authorized. And so,
Amy, I'm sorry to interrupt you. It was absolutely authorized. It just because in the situations, and I've been a part of several of those, it was in consultation with a solicitor.
I'm not talking about that kind of authority. I'm talking about having it spelled out in policy. So I don't know if that is absolutely necessary to have or not, but I'm asking the question, isn't this policy meant also to make that a little bit clearer so that there's less question about it potentially?
Yeah, I think, I mean, absolutely having a policy makes it clearer. That said, even when you allowed remote participation of board members previously, it doesn't mean that that action was improper. So I think, Amy, to your point, and Susan, to your point, I think you're both right. I think you're both making accurate statements that previously when board members would participate remotely, that was done properly and it was, authorized through internal channels. At the same time, I do think it helps to have the authority in a policy because it's just a little bit, it's clear, or if nothing else, it's clear to the public as to where the authority comes from.
Okay, great. All right, super, thanks. So sorry, Jeff, to interrupt Liz's opportunity, but I just thought that piggybacked on what Jeff was saying. Liz, do you have any comments, questions?
I have two comments. First, I was really glad to see this policy. I've actually inquired about it just last week with Amy, and so a lot was on the agenda. My first question would be, they talk about when we can make a request to participate virtually. Is there ever, and I guess this is not really a question, this is just for consideration, is there ever a point, a tipping point, where perhaps if enough people are requesting to be virtual that we then go virtual? I mean, is there something, is that worth discussing? So if there's only 3 people present, I don't know what the circumstances would be, but is there a tipping point? And then 2, in the policy down below, it says board members are only allowed to vote on matters during the time they are present. And I'm just curious whether or not, and I know that it says the minutes will note when they are present and when they leave, but if they are going to vote, are they required to be part of the deliberations? Can they just, kind of fly in, attend, vote, and then come out and not participate in what I'm thinking down the future? You could potentially have a big vote or an important vote, and do you get to vote if you aren't part of the public discussion about that?
So from a legal standpoint, if you are present at the time of the vote, you can vote. So if there was an hour discussion leading up to the vote, and then the vote is taken and you missed, 58 minutes of the discussion, but you're there at the time the vote is called, you can vote on the matter. There's no legal requirement that you have to participate in the deliberations. And actually, I don't even think that a board, if it wanted to, could impose that requirement on other board members. We did put, if you look at the first sentence under guidelines, we did indicate that being considered present is not necessarily physical presence. It just has to mean that you have to be able to hear and be heard at the meeting. So whether that's in person or whether that's virtually, that's what being present means.
Can I ask a question? In the past, have people voted virtually?
During our meetings, Liz?
Yeah, yes, in the past.
No, not virtually. People in the past have participated in meetings over the phone.
They voted over the phone. We've had, I think
Yeah.
we've had.
You have, okay, so that's virtual, okay, but not, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Liz, you good with
I'm
Mr.
good.
D responses and everything?
Yes.
Okay, all right, super. Susan, do you have any questions?
Oh, I do. Liz, I thought you had 2 questions.
Yeah, Liz, you asked about like if there was only a few people
Yes, virtual.
physically at a meeting.
Okay. Oh, I thought you asked it. Okay. So, my first, I'll just tell you, my first inclination was that I didn't want this policy as a separate policy from 006. And then, I read it and I think it's clean enough that, and easy enough to read, that as a standalone policy, it's probably fine. I do have a few issues with it though. I don't know how the rest of the board will feel about these, and they were more like deliberation things. But a couple of things about this policy that concern me are, I don't necessarily think it's a good idea. The second paragraph of the guidelines I don't necessarily think it's a good idea that there should be no limit to the number of board members who can remotely attend a board meeting.
That's me.
That could be very cumbersome. So I'm fine with the paragraph that talks about, and kind of the emergency situation where we're all participating remotely, and we're doing it with electronics through Zoom. And I think absent a policy, I think Radnor's done a really good job of recreating a public meeting about as best as could be done. A lot of things about the way we're doing it, I think, are very, very, very professional. So this doesn't speak to how we're doing things. I just would have a concern about having a physical meeting and having a board, where we're at the, the township building, and we've got 2, 3, 4, 5, 8 board members participating remotely with one board, with the board president or some board member at the physical building. That's very different from what we're doing right now, where we are all together virtually. And Liz, to answer your question, this policy doesn't speak to how they would participate remotely. And so I've been a part of, I think, 2 meetings, but it might have only been 1, but for sure 2. I mean, for sure 1, and I think 2 meetings where I participated remotely, Liz, and I remember that because it was my very first board meeting as a board member. And I was on the phone and listening and it was like a 6-hour meeting. I don't know that we'll have the technology. My concern is that we're going to have the expectation that if board members are going to attend remotely a physical meeting, that their expectation is that it's going to be Zoom the way we're doing this right now. And I'm not sure that that's really going to be workable to have a board member participate via Zoom on a live in-person board meeting. And I would be very concerned about how to have multiple board members participate via Zoom in a live board meeting. So I definitely have a concern about that. And then the only other thing about this policy that I'm a little concerned about is sometimes when you put things in writing, you end up obliging yourself to, so we've actually managed well not having a policy. There were board members who participated remotely in the past. In my time on the board, I'm not the only board member who's done that. And we've done it, we did it and we were able to do it. What I'm a little bit concerned about here in putting this in writing, are we going to end up obliging ourselves to the way in which we have to allow the public to participate? So right now, without a policy, we've created a workable way for the public to communicate. They can email us at our email address. That was something that we've had in place for several years, a way for the public, if they couldn't come to our meeting, to participate. I am a little bit concerned, the wording in here, that all rules normally applicable to in-person meetings shall be observed in meetings held primarily or entirely via remote. I'm actually concerned that we'll have the public challenge us on that statement, and we're all of a sudden going to have to create a technology where members of the public can join into our Zoom meeting so that they can be on camera when they, there's so many different things that I could imagine coming out of the good intention here and the clarification here. And I'm not sure, I respectfully disagree. I'm not sure what this is getting us other than codifying what we're doing, but what we're doing, we're already doing with the authority we have, and I think we're doing a good job of it. So this is a situation where I'm a little bit concerned that we're going to end up obligating ourselves to maybe more than we can really handle. That's just me. I have to see, I'm happy to hear what other members of the committee or other members of the board feel about this, but I do have a specific question. What is 24 PS 407 and 65 PA? I mean, what are those two legal citations? What do they say? And that they're providing for in this policy? Because I thought that these guidelines about remote meetings were fairly new.
So the second item listed would be the Sunshine Act.
Okay.
That would be the
65 PA. Okay.
And 24 section 407, that's the school code. And let me just pull up that exact language.
I tried to look at it, but I wasn't sure what they were really trying to say.
It's the provision of the school code that gives the board the ability to adopt rules and regulations governing itself. So
okay, thank you. All right.
So let me see if I can help make just a couple comments, and hopefully, Susan, they'll maybe they'll lead to some other questions, or maybe they'll answer some questions. But
okay, thank you.
The first thing, and I'm going to get a copy of the document here. So under the section of guidelines where it says there's no limit to the number of board members or other participants who may attend a board meeting and participate in deliberations and voting. There's certainly, the board could certainly put a limit on two things. Number one, you can put a limit on the number of times that a board member can participate remotely in a given year. So a provision could say, any individual board member may only participate 2 times in a given year remotely, absent an emergency scenario like the one we're in now. That then reduces, that prevents against a board member never showing up in person and always trying to participate remotely. Alternatively, you can indicate that there is a limit. You could say, for example, at least a quorum of the board needs to be present at the physical meeting. Those are two very specific provisions that school boards were concerned were too restrictive, which led many to suspend their policies. And the reason was this: even before the emergency declaration was declared, there were some districts that were beginning to move in the direction of having fewer people in one space at one time. So, for example, I'm aware of one school district where by design, they only wanted the board president and the board vice president present at the meeting with the superintendent and the board secretary, and the other 7 board members were asked to participate remotely. And again, that was so that in the boardroom, they could comply with the social distancing requirements.
Right.
So by saying that there was no limit to the number of board members that could participate in any given meeting, that was only to give school boards more flexibility to say, if the circumstances required that we still want to hold the meeting in person so that the public could come and we could ensure that they were properly social distancing, but we couldn't have all the board members sitting up at a table together, we could say that only 1 or 2 or any number of board members were going to be physically present, but the rest were going to participate remotely. But that's completely up to the board as to what it wants the rule to be. So that there are my comments regarding that section. And then regarding the comment about not wanting to lock yourself in too much, about things like public participation, the technology, I deliberately tried to leave the policy as broad as possible, just to say that the superintendent would work with the solicitor to ensure that all the legal advertising took place and that the Sunshine Act is complied with. Some districts were moving in the direction of actually putting right in their policy, like, by noon on the day of the meeting, you have to do this. We're going to use this technology. I left all of that out to give the superintendent and the board flexibility to say, well, maybe in this circumstance, we're going to use Zoom, but in this circumstance, we might use another platform. And maybe, in one set of circumstances, we may be able to take live public comment right from the meeting. but in other circumstances, we may not. So I think that there's broad discretion here. All that you have to do is ensure that you're complying with the minimum requirements of the Sunshine Act, which you have to do regardless of whether you have this policy in place or not. So those are just a couple initial comments, but I imagine that may generate additional questions, and that's fine.
All righty. Well, yeah, I mean, that's, I'm not sure what the right answer is right now. I'm just saying that those are kinds of some things that came to mind for me. So, but
Yep.
Ed, thank you.
And Susan, can I just jump in too for a minute?
Sure.
You know, Ed said something I hadn't thought about in regards to this policy. When we first started online, we had to have somebody in the room. You know, now thanks to Jackie and Byron and Chris, we figured out a way to not have someone in the room. But if you recall, the first meeting, actually, Susan and I were actually in the room. And then I had to be there because we felt that was the only way to get it to stream and the streaming live, all those pieces. And then by our third meeting, we figured out another way. So I actually do think this conversation might be a good conversation in the sense that, you know, sometimes less is more. Let's not do anything that's going to tie our hands or make it more difficult with unknowns. You know, if it has worked out well, the lack of policy, if it has worked out well, there's just so many unknowns. It just really struck me, Ed, in your explanation of it, that, you know, how we had to start this, we wound up starting very differently, you know, having a board president, just the superintendent, when we were conducting the meeting. So I think we should just be mindful of, you know, whether or not, as we put things in policy, could we be making things more difficult for ourselves down the road?
Right, and I wanted to, I guess there's sort of a risk reward here thing. In hearing the feedback, I'm curious as to whether or not this policy could potentially give us more risk than reward for having it there. Can you assess that for us, Ed, based on some of the things that Ken and Susan have said? And then we lost Liz. Unfortunately, she got bumped off.
Okay.
I don't know if she's back.
Here.
She is? Okay, well then let me give it to Liz and Jeff. Do you have any thoughts before we have Ed give us some a more summative response based on what you've heard from Susan and Ken? Or you're still?
No, I mean, I'll finish and Liz can, you know, weigh in. I'm struggling for the very reasons, and I think this is like maybe you outlined as risk reward, like and that's why I asked the question about do we need it? What's the risk in not having it and doing things right? And then, but also the good governance I see as having something for the public to see, because especially moving into next year, we don't know what's going to happen and what have you. So I'm still open and I'm ready to keep listening and talking.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jeff, for that feedback. Liz, were you able to listen to any of that conversation, or were you offline for that? Did we lose her again?
I think she's
on
trying.
mute.
I don't.
Okay, sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Sorry. I heard a bit of Susan, but I didn't hear all of Ken. And I think I've got the gist of what you're saying. I can appreciate that. I guess I think, and I would agree, I think it has worked really well and we've been able to conduct business. But I guess I'm looking more down the road. What if, you know, the dynamics change and I guess along that line of setting up good governance, does it make sense to codify it? And then one thing I did like in this, and again, we've been operating under this, but like this policy set also expectations for us, like how board members are to participate. So I did like that expectations were set. And so I have to think a little bit about, I'd like to hear a little bit more when I can, I'd like to hear more thoughts on it.
So Ed, and then I want to give you another chance to respond just quickly, because I know we're approaching 6 o'clock. You know, some of the, you know, maybe there is something potentially to tweak. I heard your response to one of Susan's questions, which was about how you can say that generally meetings should run we should attempt to be in person unless there are extenuating circumstances. I sort of heard that little caveat that some boards add in so that no one potentially is very casual about this opportunity to operate remotely. So maybe that's something to think about. You know, this sounds like it could be a policy that comes back again for another first read, because we're running a little bit out of time here tonight. And it gives you a chance, given the feedback that you've gotten, to rethink it and maybe modify it for us potentially a little bit. The other thing that I wanted to give you some feedback on for definition was, assuming we're going to keep working on this policy, is that for the purposes of when we describe board meeting, I wasn't quite sure why we had to have a separate definition for board meeting, because we do have one in policy 006. And we could be potentially doing any of those kinds of meetings defined in there that are called board meetings remotely. And then separately, we would think this would also apply to executive sessions and information sessions that aren't listed under the definition of board meeting in 006. So I was wondering if it made sense to reference 006 somehow. So that covers everything, including emergency meetings. And then, like I said, because committee meetings are also included as part of board meeting in that definition. And then you separate out executive sessions and information sessions. So that was one thing to give you as food for thought. And then the other food for thought was on the second page, where the paragraph starts at the discretion of the board president or presiding officer. The second sentence says, under the scenario. I thought it maybe should say this scenario or something else, just pointing out that word. And then again, just my final comment in light of what time it is, the footnotes, all the policies and the state code are blended under legal. So along the theme of consistency, could we have a revision of that? And footnotes have not yet been placed in this. Regardless of hyperlinks, footnotes themselves haven't been put in. So, you know, I think that because I'm mindful of the fact that we need to move on to another meeting in 2 minutes, I'm wondering if we should just clean this up a bit and bring it back again for a first read next time we meet, or move it forward for a first read of the full board and get everybody's feedback.
Well, I guess I wanted to just chime in. Like, I'm not really hearing a clear answer about how this policy helps us. So, and that's kind of always my perspective on, if we're going to have a policy, it should be a policy that helps us, doesn't hurt us. And you know, I agreed with the notion that it's good enough, or it's good as a standalone policy. I'm just not sure that I even heard from the board that there's consensus to move it forward, or the good, or the benefit that this brings us compared to the risk.
That's why I was proposing that maybe we pull this we don't move forward with this. This is what I'm putting out for consideration.
Don't put it forward.
Yeah, correct.
I misheard that.
And that we bring it back next time we meet, so that we aren't in a time crunch. It gives Ed and Anthony a little time to think about it, and us as committee members to think about it. We can have a better discussion, a fuller discussion next time. And then if we can decide what to do with it from there, because we are running out of time tonight. Would anybody be in favor of just pulling this for now and bumping it to the next time we meet for more discussion? Anybody?
I'm good. I just want to ask a question about calendar. Are we scheduled to meet? I don't think we have anything in the near future.
Well,
we know when.
Usually we have use committee meetings in August as opposed to July. That's flexible depending on people's vacations, but we've never been in a pandemic before. So I think it remains to be seen what we're going to be doing a little bit. So just in the interest of time, can we get back to you on that, Jeff? And just...
No, it's fine. It doesn't change my thought and agreement with what you said, Ms. Woolman. It just was curious because we're going to know a lot more, obviously, in August, let's say we meet in August, we don't meet in July, than we would today. So
Right, so.
makes sense.
So, committee members, Liz, Susan, how do you feel about us punting this to another meeting for some more discussion?
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Okay, Liz, are you there? I'm sorry, I can't
hear
hear you.
That's fine.
Okay, I have the phone ringing. Okay. When can we meet in person again? This remote thing is getting a little old. Mr. Diazio.
I haven't heard a house phone in the longest time.
I know, I should
It's so quaint.
The only thing it is solicitations, and I get exercise reaching.
Have you voted yet? They're asking if you voted. We won't put you on the spot. You voted by mail.
So anyway, I'm sorry. So, Mr. Batchelor, Dr. Stevenson, Mr. Diazio, are you guys okay to take this consensus and move it to our next meeting for more discussion? I've got a thumbs up, Mr. Batchelor. Feel free to give me your thumbs up, your hand wave, something.
I agree. I think
okay.
That'll make sense. That makes sense to me.
Okay, great. So thank you very much. We're ready to go with the other items for the end of the month. And with that, I will just double check and see if by any chance there happens to be new business on anybody's part.
Was there one more item on the agenda? A quick item?
Originally, but it was taken off.
Okay.
That was, I forget the number, 201.
Okay.
So that'll be something on the next agenda as well. Okay. 201 was pulled off after a board leadership conversation. So, no new business. Any public comment, Mr. Petiti, by any chance?
No public comment.
Okay. So with that, we'll conclude our, oh my goodness, is it June Policy Committee meeting, and see you all sometime over the summer. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Miss Amy?
Yes, Dr. Stevenson.
Before we leave, can we say congratulations to Avery, right? Avery, are you graduating?
No.
He's a super junior.
All right. Sorry, Avery, I've been gone. Never mind.
You're good.
Oh, yes.
Can't get rid of her yet, Stevenson.
You wouldn't let her go without
We'd be crying if we had to let our seniors say goodbye to our juniors, let alone our seniors, makes me cry. So,
but we do wish our seniors well and congratulate them, and our
course.
8th graders and our 5th graders.
Thank you.
Yes.
All right.
All right. Thanks, everyone.